Well, you think it's late for you. It's 3:30 in the morning. We were closing the show to the sounds of prayer just the other day when we were in Jakarta. Tonight we will end the show to the sun coming out like thunder across the bay. It is a remarkable thing that the wonders of a mom and pop and son show can come to you live all the way from Bali. I hope you will agree. I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas and are looking forward to a peaceful and prosperous new year and a healthy one. I am now finding myself increasingly saying. Now, it is, of course, not the most important news issue or item of the day, but for someone of my age and gender, at least, the death of Brigitte Bardot marked the end of an era. In the 1960s, she was quite the most ravishing, beautiful woman in the entire world. I'm not sure you would have wanted to bring her home to meet your mother, and I'm not sure it would have been wise to marry her, but she really, truly was somebody. She really was emblematic of a France in the 1960s, which seemed to ooze sensuality and style. We're talking the era of Brigitte Bardot, of Alain Delon, to whom I was briefly compared. Well, she did actually come to Scotland in 1966 to the sands of Gullane, or Gullane, Gullane, just near the town of North Berwick, where I worked for a month or so in what became the famous and very important North Berwick by-election, the Berwick and East Lothian by-election, to give it its Sunday name, when the prospects of the SNP winning a rock-solid and historic Labour seat held by John P. Mackintosh, a great Labour intellectual of the time, were very real indeed. I remember it for many reasons, not just because I was cavorting in the sands where once Brigitte Bardot did, but because the Iranian Revolution began in that very month. And I remember the Labour Foreign Secretary deploring, condemning the people of Iran rising up against the British favourite of the time, the late Shah of Persia. I remember thinking, how could a Labour Foreign Secretary be backing a despotic Shah and against a people's revolution? And then I learned that's what foreign ministers of Labour governments do in times of trouble. Beware of the geeks bearing gifts, by the way, and you don't get more geeky than John Healey, the current British Defence Secretary. He's trying to entice our students to take a gap year. Not in Bali, as would once have been the case, but in the British Army. Well, if they've been educated at all, if they have the brains to have gotten to university in the first place, they'll blow a huge raspberry to the chief geek, John Healey, so-called war minister in another so-called Labour government. But the big story, of course, tonight is the story unfolding on a different set of sands, on new beaches, not Gullane and definitely not Bali. The beaches of Florida, Mar-a-Lago, the summer White House, which Donald Trump seems to occupy quite a lot of the year. He plays golf there daily, despite the bone spurs problem that kept him out of the Vietnam War and earned him 7 deferments so that he wouldn't have to die face down in a paddy in Southeast Asia. I've been looking at the paddies in this area over the last few days, and a magnificent sight they are, but you wouldn't want to die face down in them for the American empire. Well, there in Mar-a-Lago, little Zelensky is presently. He's presently ensconced, having stopped off briefly, you might say, but very profitably in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which definitely isn't Mar-a-Lago, definitely isn't Florida, with all my respect to the good people of Nova Scotia. Why did he stop in Halifax? Well, why else does he stop anywhere? He had his bag open and he picked up another $3 billion. It's a magic number, that. $3 billion from Mark Carney, the man who robbed the Bank of England and who is now the Prime Minister of Canada, although Trump calls him the Governor of Canada, which he intends, before he leaves office, if he can, to make a State of the Union. Mark Carney, despite the fact that the public sector deficit in Canada is a world record deficit, despite the fact that millions of Canadians are now food insecure, despite the fact that homelessness is rife in Canada, despite the fact that people are freezing and unable to heat their homes, there's always money when Zelensky comes to town. This despite the fact that the NBU, the people who are nabbing parliamentarians, ministers, and chief officials in Ukraine are on the rampage back in Kiev, where corruption is ever closer, closing in on Zelensky himself. The American-driven anti-corruption drive, too little, too late, as Hunter Biden just told us, the corruption in Ukraine was scary, and he was very foolish to have gone there. Very foolish, but exceedingly well paid. The emolument of working for Burisma in Kiev was surely irresistible for him. And it was definitely irresistible for his father, the big guy, who was then the Vice President of the United States. So as the internationally recognized anti-corruption drive narrows in, zeroes in on lots of zeros of euros, dollars, and pounds, Mark Carney just handed billions of Canadian dollars to little Zelensky, who then took off for sunnier climes. And there he is now in Mar-a-Lago. I don't want to be churlish. I'm as keen for this war to end as anyone else. But the mood music is not particularly conducive to me. We'll see what my expert guests have to say about it. But the fact is, Trump is sounding bullish. Trump is sounding like a man with the Nobel Peace Prize firmly in his mind. And if not the Nobel Peace Prize, then the FIFA World Cup Peace Prize. Oh no, he's already got that, despite launching 8 wars in the time that he has been involved. Oh, sorry, that was solving 8 wars, most of which haven't been solved at all. Donald Trump is sounding bullish. He is saying that the time has come for peace, and that both leaders, Putin, to whom he spoke in a friendly conversation, that was his word to describe it, for 1.5 hours before Zelensky arrived. That was an early start for the Donald. And then Zelensky, who has no cards, as Donald Trump acutely observed months ago in the Oval Office, is also now interested in peace. Well, we'll see about that. The caveats with which Zelensky habitually cushions these kind of statements are caveats that are deal breakers. So we shouldn't be over optimistic. But the scenario is an indicator of how badly the war is now going for Zelensky and his corrupt regime in Kiev and the NATO enablers of this bloody war, which has killed, I remind you, millions of people, has driven 9 million Ukrainians from their home, has caused death and destruction on a scale not seen in Europe since the Second World War, in a war that should never have started back in 2014, when NATO surreptitiously at first began to encourage the use of Ukraine as a cat's paw, as a knife, actually, in the side of Russia. If it all comes to pass, I'll be the first one to take my hat off to Donald Trump. If it all ends today, tomorrow, in the next few days, Trump has said that as soon as he's finished with Zelensky, he'll be phoning Vladimir Putin again. Vladimir Putin, though, was in action in military gear. He is the commander-in-chief of the Russian armed forces, who are presently sweeping all before them, and he talked tough. He said if Zelensky doesn't want to negotiate an end peacefully to this carnage, this catastrophe, then the Russian armed forces will end it by force. And looking at the military map, as I do 10 times every single day, it's not an idle boast. There is no doubt that if a deal is not struck as a result of these talks in Mar-a-Lago, then there will be no deal, and the Russians will go all the way, maybe even all the way to Kiev, at least until they have installed a government in Kiev that is reliably neutral and reliably not hostile to them. That's the price that we pay for having failed to grasp the multiple diplomatic opportunities that there were to solve this matter before the big fighting even really started. It's important to remember the Minsk agreements. I was recently in Minsk, as you know, and I'm fully seized of the perfidy that was visited on the world by the deliberate sabotage of the Minsk agreements. That was before the special military operation even started. Both the Angela Merkel, the then German Chancellor, and François Hollande, the then French President, who were both guarantors of the Minsk III agreement, have confessed in public that the Minsk agreements were never meant to work. They were meant only to give breathing space and time to build up the military of the Ukrainian regime and then to use them again in a phase two. It's important to remember the Istanbul Agreement within a couple of weeks of the military operation beginning, which were inked by both Russia and Ukraine and would have ended this war before it ever really got started. That was scuppered by our own Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. It's important never to forget these things. And the Alaska formula agreed in Anchorage between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin should now be used to bring this conflict to an end, and an era of, if not amity, then at least an absence of hostility and enmity should now dawn. Speaking of dawn, it's coming up before me quite soon. Only time really for me to talk about the situation in Somaliland. I've been being softened up by those behind the attempt to secede from Somalia by something called Somaliland, which is an entirely fictional entity, a brutal British torture chamber. And it isn't even all of Somaliland. Somaliland is 4 parts. 3 of the parts want to remain in Somalia. We have a breakaway separatist clan now declaring independence in Somaliland. It only has 1 country in the world recognizing it. And which country, dear viewer, do you think that is? Israel is the only country in the world to afford legal and official recognition to this breakaway statelet, this rump of Somaliland. Why would they do that? Well, a glance at the map will show you not just why they would do it, but why the Americans would be secretly backing it. A look at the geography of Somaliland would show that it would command the waterways in the Horn of Africa to an extent that is truly world-changing. It would change the balance of force in the world. Now, the proximate reason for Israel's recognition is to take occupation of the Berbera air base, which they have just done this evening. Why would Israel want the Berbera airbase? Well, from that airbase, they could very easily and regularly bomb Yemen without having to take the trouble of flying over multiple Arab countries, embarrassing those countries in order to do so. It would also, of course, be a handy staging point for further attacks on Iran. Question is, will it work? Well, one of the best things I read today was from a news source in Gaza, which said it's quite clear the Israelis plan on deporting us to this new fake entity of Somaliland. But if they do, we'll only be there 5 minutes, and in association with our Somali brothers, we'll take the place over. And then we will hold Berbera Air Base, and we will be able to blockade the Persian Gulf, blockade the waters of the Red Sea. Now, I don't think Israel is that stupid, but if they are planning on deporting the fighting people of Gaza to Somaliland, they have got another think coming. It won't work because none of the Arab countries can afford, officially at least, to give it recognition, to follow in the footsteps of Benjamin Netanyahu. None of the countries of the world that we call the global south will do so. None of the African countries will do so. And in fact, if I'm any judge, there'll be an international brigade amassing perfectly soon in Somalia proper to take this renegade semi-province over again. Well, I don't know how long I've been speaking because we started at an unauthorized time, for which again, I'm sorry, but we have got two great guests. Coming up, it's Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar, who made his name not just as an American officer, but made his name as a hero of Gaza. And he'll be talking about all of these things. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.